and share this video. You're curious to know why men cry. Today, let's talk about what men hide their tears. What is behind it? Why are they afraid to show their vulnerability, and how to realize that tears are not weakness, but a natural reaction? Let's figure it out. Men cry too. Their tears are always touching, because you don't see them very often. If men do cry, it is more likely to be furtively. And even in our days, when the ban on such displays of affection has become weaker, men's tears are still a mystery to women. Men are crying today. Without a doubt, they succumb to emotions much more easily than the older generation. The last time I cried in a movie was when I watched Anthony Minghella, The English Patient, Alexander admits. An unusual confession from the mouth of a 32-year-old lawyer. But would his father have told about his emotions with the same ease? He certainly never cried. The son is sure. Nowadays, a man does not have to hold back tears in order to confirm his masculinity, notes psychotherapist Alexander. In the last 15 years, gender stereotypes of displays of emotionality have become less rigid. But it is still too early to say that the reactions of men and women have become. Is it possible to compare the streams pouring from women's eyes in the same cinema hall with the moistened gazes of their companions? My throat caught, my eyes pinched, Alexander continues, and adds, I had no idea I was capable of falling into such a state, especially because of a movie. As a child, Alexander, like most boys, was often told that a real man should not cry. This cultural stereotype is still significant in modern society. Parents continue to bring up their sons, limiting their emotionality, explains sexologist Igor Khan. This subsequently keeps men from openly showing their feelings. When I realize I might cry, I either look away from what has hurt me or find something to distract me, to help me switch. Agrees David, 43. Men also hold back emotions because most of them are action-minded. Clarifies psychotherapist Patrick Lemoyne. They are not inclined, unlike women, to listen to their feelings, to follow them. And tears do not allow them to act. They take away time and energy. In addition, to cry means to recognize your powerlessness, defeat, inability to cope with the situation, and that's why you shouldn't let your tears flow. The 51-year-old Sergei can't remember a single occasion when he cried. I don't know what could have shaken me enough to bring tears to my eyes, except for the death or illness of loved ones, of course. Such tears are allowed by society because they confirm men's belonging to the human race, their normality, explains the psychotherapist. But if tears are any indication that a man has problems or feelings he can't cope with, from a generally recognized point of view, they seem inappropriate, indicative of his failure. Death, suffering of a loved one, parting with loved ones, and feelings of joy, these reasons for tears men name at once without thinking. I cried when I found out that my son was born, recalls 26-year-old Roman. The tears came on their own, but I am proud of them because it was an exceptional event. Similar feelings were experienced by 23-year-old Semyon when the national team reached the semifinals at the European Football Championship. No one was ashamed of their tears. On the contrary, they could only be proud of them. Proud because they marked a victory, a deserved triumph, Alexander Orlov adds. These were tears of unity, patriotism, and, therefore, worthy of respect. Reticence, but even when emotions take over, very few men show them as openly and vigorously as women do. When my father died, I was in despair, but I couldn't cry, admits 34-year-old Pyotr. My sister was sobbing, and I understood that she was judging me for my insensitivity, but I never cried. Tears allow us to express our deepest feelings. Not too inclined to discuss feelings, men cry more restrained than women, and cry for themselves. If a man cannot stand it and breaks down into tears, he wants only one thing: to shrink into a lump, to be left alone, to shut himself in, to sort things out, to reflect, and ultimately, if possible, find inner peace. Since men rarely cry, Tears have a psychotherapeutic effect on them, and the effect is even more tangible than for women. I rarely cry, and if I do, the tears come suddenly, Stefan, 21, admits, but afterwards, I feel a special lightness. Peter, 24, on the other hand, finds tears devastating. It feels like you've deflated like a balloon. Afterwards, he feels completely shattered and ashamed. One tear and there's a chink in the armor. Those who were brought up under the slogan, "A man should always keep himself in control. Any outbursts of emotion are regarded as a loss of self-control," explains Igor Khan. And they try to suppress, hide, control their feelings. And if they fail, they suffer from guilt. Loss of self-control means for them a divergence from the Superman image they would like to live up to. I didn't know a father could cry. Valerie, 41, sound engineer. I will never forget the day I saw tears in my father's eyes. I was about 12 years old. My grandmother, my dad's mom, so strong, cheerful, was put in the hospital. She couldn't walk. For some reason, no one in the family talked about it. One evening, returning from the hospital, my father said to my mother, "I saw a stick with such a tripod in the drugstore. We can buy one when Mom gets back on her feet." And Mom looked at him point blank and said dryly, "You know damn well she'll never get up again. I mean, face it, don't be a child." And I saw my father suddenly bend, shrink, become small, as if he had actually become a child. There were tears in his eyes. When he saw me, he tried to straighten up, but he couldn't. Then he took out a handkerchief and hid his face in it that I was shocked. My father, who I thought was so strong, so invincible, could cry. Suddenly I realized that I understood his pain, and I got angry at my mom. Even now, when I think back, I still feel all that and worry again. Unlike my father, I've never tried to hide what's inside me from mine. I want them to understand what I'm experiencing. Right to be vulnerable. This display of sensitivity touches women, but it also makes some of them uneasy. I feel uncomfortable when I see men crying, admits 26-year-old Elizaveta. It throws me off. It's like we're switching roles. When Anna, 48, saw her husband cry for the first time, she was shocked. It was touching precisely because it was unusual. But if it had happened at the beginning of our relationship, I'm not sure I would have decided to commit my life to him. It's hard to feel protected around an overly emotional man. For a long time, men's tears violated the conventional view of true masculinity. Today, however, they are increasingly seen as evidence of genuine feelings. Tired of gritting their teeth to play the role of the hero, more and more men are allowing themselves to show vulnerability, but in silence, in private. For a man, tears are often a symbol that his inner world is so saturated that he can no longer physically hold the storm. However, their manifestation is not always associated with external tragedies, like the death of a loved one or loss. Emotional overload can occur in the most trivial situations, at the moment of dissatisfaction with oneself, failure in work, or feeling helpless to solve a problem that cannot be controlled. Take Robert, for example, a successful man who has always been confident in himself and his abilities. He runs a large company, solves the most complex issues every day, and feels confident in any situation. But one day, at an important meeting, his project was not accepted. He saw his colleagues laughing, discussing his ideas with contempt. At that moment, despite his best efforts to keep a straight face, Robert felt his pectoral muscles clench. For a moment, it seemed to him that the whole world was collapsing. He found himself alone with his fears and inner feelings, which he had been hiding for a long time. What was happening to him at that moment was not just an experience of shame. It was a conflict between what was expected of him and who he really was. Robert couldn't allow himself to be vulnerable, but the tears were a last resort to show that he was unable to deal with what was going on inside. This is the moment when a man faces his own feelings and realizes that he needs to make a change. Not always the result of external pressure. Most often they are the product of an internal conflict that has remained invisible for a long time. Men, like all people, experience pain, loss, disappointments, but they are not allowed to openly express their feelings because social norms require restraint. This is the reason why tears sometimes spill out at the most unexpected moment, at the moment of weakness, when there is nothing more to hide. It is important to realize that a man's emotions are not a weakness. On the contrary, the ability to express your feelings, despite inhibitions and inner fears, is a sign of strength. Understanding your emotions and expressing them is not a sign of weakness, but a path to self-awareness and harmony. Emotional maturity begins with being aware of one's feelings and knowing how to deal with them. After all, tears that manifest themselves at critical moments can be not only a catharsis, but also an act of liberation. A man who knows how to accept his emotions is freed from inner conflict and becomes a more whole person. At this point, he is not afraid to be vulnerable. He realizes that it is in vulnerability that strength lies. Let's take another example, this time from the life of a famous athlete. James was known for his indomitable determination and willpower. Every match was a real battle for him, in which he fought not only with his opponents, but also with his own doubts and fears. But in one of the most important games, when his team was on the verge of victory, James made a mistake. He did not have time to block the opponent's key shot, and his team lost. The next day, as he sat alone in his locker room, his emotions overwhelmed him. He felt not only shame, but deep resentment toward himself. He had been hiding his weaknesses for so long, thinking that he should always be on top of his game, and then one mistake and his whole strong personality began to crumble. At that moment, the tears he had been holding back for a long time finally broke through. But interestingly enough, they weren't tears of regret for losing. They were tears of pain from realizing how long he had lived with this unexpressed sense of internal pressure. He realized that being impenetrable is not about being strong. On the contrary, real strength is being able to accept your mistakes and express your feelings. Sometimes men cry not because the world has fallen on their shoulders, but because for years they have held back their real emotions for fear of appearing weak. In such a case, tears become not a manifestation of weakness, but a way to release loads that could not be expressed before. This is the moment when the man realizes that the hidden pain prevents him from moving on, and the tears become a catharsis, a cleansing from the past. Case of Steve, a simple office worker. He is married, has 2 children, and externally he is doing fine. But inside, Steve felt he couldn't be the way his wife wanted him to be and not conform to society's expectations. Every day he worked his ass off to provide for his family, forgetting his own desires and interests. He tried to be a perfect husband and father, but somewhere deep down he felt empty and frustrated. One day, at a family dinner, when the family was discussing plans for the future, his wife casually mentioned how much she wished Steve would be more open to share his experiences. Those words struck like a bolt of lightning for Steve. He realized that for years he hadn't talked about his feelings, hoping that it didn't matter. At that moment, unable to hold back, he began to cry. They were not tears of distress or loss, but rather tears of realization that he may have lost himself in living for others. But those tears were the first step toward change. So what happens? Men who hide their emotions at some point find that their repressed feelings begin to seep through the cracks in their outer shell. And hidden in this display of weakness is not weakness, but the greatest strength. Emotions, the recognition of which they have been avoiding, begin to free them from their inner chains. Men who have learned to express their feelings become more whole persons. They are not afraid to be vulnerable because they realize that vulnerability is their true strength. Remember, tears are not the end, but the beginning of a new understanding of yourself. It's a chance to free yourself from what's been holding you back inside. Strong men feel too, and that's okay. Don't be afraid to show your emotions. Thank you for being with us.